I will describe in detail the 12th verse of Chapter 1, Prathopadesh, Rasamarna, of Rasaratnakara Rasayankhand. But, to truly grasp the profound depths of this ancient Sanskrit verse, we really have to look at the entire ecosystem of physical and spiritual discipline that surrounds it. We're exploring this absolutely fascinating historical world where alchemy, medicine, and just intense physical regimens all intersected in the pursuit of absolute perfection.
Okay, let's dive right into the physical text itself. The title page of the Rasayankhanda you're seeing here was carefully edited by Vaidya Jadavji Trikumji Acharya back in 1939, and it serves as our primary historical window into these ancient regimens. It's an extraordinary compilation, really. It captures literally centuries of classical Indian alchemical thought. By examining this exact document, we get a direct, unfiltered look at how historical practitioners documented their most guarded secrets.
Now, what's really interesting about this opening invocation from our source material is how it immediately hooks us. The text begins, Jayati sa rasarajo mrityu jarapa hari, which translates to victory to the king of Mercuries, the destroyer of death and old age. I mean, wow, right? It doesn't start with some modest claim. No, it starts with the ultimate classical promise, the complete conquering of mortality and the reversal of aging. It sets a massive, super ambitious stage for the strict medical and alchemical procedures that follow.
Section 1. Unlocking Ancient Indian Alchemy, the Quest for Deha Siddhi.
So, to understand the extreme and highly specific alchemical regimens prescribed later in the text, especially that pivotal 12th verse, we first have to wrap our heads around the foundational philosophy driving them. Like, why go through such intense and, quite frankly, dangerous procedures? Well, it all comes down to one singular, incredibly powerful concept. And that concept is Deha Siddhi. As outlined in the text, Deha Siddhi is the historical belief in absolute bodily perfection. The text asserts that a totally flawless physical state is literally a prerequisite before you can achieve any real success in this world, whether that's spiritual enlightenment or material mastery. They genuinely believed that a decaying, aging body was an imperfect vessel. So before even attempting to conquer the mind or the universe, the alchemist first had to completely conquer their own biology.
And this source brilliantly illustrates the highly structured approach they took to achieve this. Just looking at the Chapter 1 index, you can really see the method behind the madness. It doesn't just jump into making magical potions. Instead, it moves methodically from Deha Siddhi Prashansa, the praise of bodily perfection, directly into strict purificatory rites, the do's and don'ts, and only then does it get into the complex rules for actually consuming potent alchemical substances. It is a deeply logical, step-by-step manual.
Section 2. Preparing the body, the purificatory rites.
Before we even reach the medicinal regimens like those in verse 12, this explainer source reveals a rigorous physical detoxification process. You couldn't just casually consume these heavy metals. Your body had to be completely emptied and reset. Looking at this exact page from the text, we see the section outlining the Purva Karma, the preliminary acts. The verses here detail the mandatory physical cleansing that absolutely must precede any alchemy. The ancient practitioners understood that introducing incredibly potent, biologically active substances into an unprepared system, that would be totally disastrous.
So the crucial point here is the sheer intensity of this preparation. Practitioners had to follow very strict steps. First up, selecting an auspicious day. Then, engaging in intense physical purging. We're talking induced vomiting and evacuation to completely clear the digestive tract. Finally, for 3 whole days, they subsisted on a highly specific botanical liquid diet, consuming things like the juices of local plants just to balance their system. Only after this absolutely grueling prep were their bodies actually deemed ready for the heavy metals.
Section 3. Dissecting verse 12, the rules of the regimen. Now let's move to our primary specimen and see how this all builds into the highly specific rules governing the practitioner's daily life. This is where the broad philosophy of alchemy suddenly narrows down into the nitty-gritty minutiae of daily human existence. Nestled right on this page is the pivotal 12th verse. This verse is fascinating because it shifts the focus from the grand spiritual philosophy of conquering death right down to tangible, everyday physical actions. It details the exact hygiene, diet, and lifestyle constraints required while undergoing the chemical treatment. It's honestly a beautifully structured piece of ancient medical literature that leaves absolutely no room for error.
The verse begins, Abhyangam mastuna kuryat snanam chaiva sukambuna. Literally translated, this mandates daily oil massages and bathing in comfortably warm water. While taking the alchemical medicine, this acted as a strict hygienic anchor. The text is actively managing the physical heat and stress the body is under by prescribing these specific, soothing physical therapies. So it's not just about the internal medicine, right? It's just as much about external physical care.
The verses surrounding verse 12 outline some really intense constraints, literally dividing life into strict pathyani, or do's, and veryani, or don'ts. Practitioners were forced onto a diet of cooling items, things like milk, ghee, and wheat. They were also required to practice strict celibacy. On the flip side, pungent oils, sour gruel, and wine were entirely forbidden. But get this, it wasn't just physical. The text explicitly forbids psychological distress, like anger or worry. You had to maintain complete emotional equilibrium while the alchemy was at work in your body. Talk about pressure.
Now you might be wondering, why such extreme rules? Well, the text actually explains itself very clearly. Rasundre bhakshamane tu kamanado jayate nara. It claims that this strict regimen is absolutely necessary because consuming processed mercury, referred to as resendra, drastically alters the body's internal chemistry and dramatically increases physical desires and heat. So the cooling diet and the emotional suppression? Those were essentially ancient mechanisms designed to counteract the overwhelming physiological effects of these heavy metals.
Section 4. The Mastery of Mercury. Paradomarana Vidi.
This brings us to a really critical question. Exactly how did these ancient alchemists prepare these inherently dangerous heavy metals for internal consumption without, immediately harming themselves? This page of the source text details the Paradomarana Vidi, the method of mercury mastery. This is the elaborate classical process of processing, neutralizing, and combining elements to allegedly strip away their natural toxicity. In the ancient Indian alchemical tradition, raw mercury was considered highly toxic, true, but properly killed or processed mercury, that was seen as the ultimate elixir of life.
Following the exact steps laid out in the text, historical practitioners really believed they could achieve this transformation. Step 1 involved combining pure mercury with equal parts sulfur. Step 2 required grinding this mixture with very specific, highly acidic or reactive botanical juices. And Step 3 involved sustained trituration, which is basically continuous rhythmic grinding in a mortar over a period of days. Through this incredibly intense mechanical and chemical processing, they genuinely believed they were locking the volatile mercury into a safe, life-extending compound.
Looking at all of this together, it is truly fascinating to contrast the two sides of this ancient text. On one hand, you have the miraculous promises, conquering aging, achieving Deha Siddhi, becoming essentially immortal. But on the other hand, you have the grueling, highly disciplined reality of the process, severe physical purging, total emotional suppression, incredibly strict dietary limits, and the daily consumption of heavily processed, inherently dangerous metals. It required an absolute, unwavering commitment of both body and mind.
Ultimately, exploring verse 12 and its surrounding texts leaves us with a pretty profound realization. While the methods, consuming processed mercury and sulfur, are radically different from modern medicine, the underlying human desire is exactly the same. We are left wondering, how do these ancient, demanding protocols reflect our own ongoing obsession with health, longevity, and mastering the human body? So, what do you think? The tools have definitely evolved, but the quest for Deha Siddhi, has it ever really stopped?